I think bravery is overcoming something.
You have to be able to get knocked down and rise again.
I think a lot of my thing with bravery, resilience, and fierceness has like a lot to do with artistic outlets.
It takes a lot to post something that you created, and it's because it's many reasons, but like for me, it's always doubt in my own head.
To create whatever art you make, you really dig to the depths of your soul and reach like what makes you beautiful on the inside, and then pull it out of you and turn it into the form of your pleasing. And the fierceness in that is being able to give it to someone else.
I think telling the truth, being honest, is genuinely one of the hardest things people have to do.
I feel like expressing yourself in like the most authentic way is like the truest form of bravery, because you don't care. You don't care how people like take you. You don't care how like you're perceived. You just are. You just exist, and however people feel about you, it doesn't define how you feel about yourself, and it doesn't define like what you can or can't be in the world.
I think I feel fragile 99% of the time, and I want to be fierce 100% of the time, and that's tough.
I feel vulnerable more often these days. I do feel fragile more often. I notice it when I'm alone. I notice it when things are quiet.
I think that vulnerability isn't being weak, but I think when you're being vulnerable, you can also feel weak.
It is so difficult to be vulnerable. Because I used to think that to be vulnerable was to like show a side of you that was broken. But more so the idea of vulnerability to me now is just being open.
I've really been closed off for a long time. Like I never felt vulnerable and didn't want to let people in and feel fragile, and it hasn't been until I came to school in Chicago that I was able to feel like I could open myself up.
We need to stay fragile because that teaches us to learn our limits within ourselves, and we need to know when we can allow ourselves to break a little bit and let ourselves grow.
There's a passiveness in which you can learn to live, but living and growing requires that fragility, a willingness to take yourself out of what's comfortable and easy.
It takes a lot. It's not easy to be vulnerable. It's a skill that you think you have to learn over time along the way.
If you are not capable of understanding other people's experiences or believing that others around you can empathize with yours, then it's difficult to be vulnerable and to open yourself up to others with the expectation that they will understand or be sympathetic to you.
But I definitely think we all need to learn how to be vulnerable and how to accept vulnerability from other people, in order to reach our best selves and to be the best friends, the best siblings, partners, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend that you could be to anybody in the world.
I feel like most of the times I've actually been very vulnerable. It wasn't even on purpose, It was like somebody did something or I did something or the timing was right, and then it was like I happened to find out something later that I was like, yeah, that was actually a really pure moment.
There have been times in relationships I've had with friends, family, whatever, where being vulnerable it's not reciprocated. I found in those situations, you can be discouraged to stop sharing, to stop being who you are. But if I don't tell my story, who's going to tell it for me?
I think I'm someone who, for my whole life, has always wanted to be seen as fierce, or I wanted to be seen as gentle, and I could never fully make my mind up about which.
You hear be yourself so much, right? And I have never known what that meant, because who the fuck am I? Who am I supposed to be? Because, I'm a different person. I'm like 5 different people throughout the day. I'm a different dude at noon than I am at 9 p.m.
I think there was a lot of reckoning there for a little while, but eventually I realized that I don't have to make myself choose, and I can be both, whether separately or at the same time.
I think a lot of my fucking vulnerability, fragility, softness is me trying to forgive myself for being so fucking rude all the time to myself.
I think it's important, if you're going to be vulnerable, that you feel empowered to be vulnerable for yourself, not because you need to be vulnerable to please other people or to get people to like you or to get people to talk to you. It's an empowering thing you're doing for yourself first.
Fierceness comes with this idea of strength, and it's easy to think that strength is a lack of softness or a lack of vulnerability. And I think so many people have been pushing that idea for so long, and I think that's not true.
There's perseverance in everyday life, and I think that that's kind of one of the things, is that we try to make it seem like resilience or strength is this thing that only happens like in certain scenarios, but like it happens in regular everyday life.
I think getting up every single morning and having a goal and having a mission that drives me, despite all the negatives that have happened in my life, is my almost defiant act of bravery or resilience.
Only when you're honest with yourself and others does that fragility come out. And in expressing that is fierceness.
You have to be willing to be on the ground level, to recognize that you're not perfect, that things are happening to you, and ultimately you just say, screw it. I'm just going to push anything I can and, allow myself to be vulnerable, but allow myself in that vulnerability now to gain strength to move forward.
There is fierceness and power and strength in being vulnerable.
You just have to, be brave enough to be fragile. And, if you allow yourself to be vulnerable and put yourself out there and know that when you get knocked down, you can get back up again, then you could do anything.
And it doesn't mean I don't have feelings about it. It doesn't mean I haven't punched a wall and I haven't screamed and I haven't cried and I haven't felt like shit some days. But I think the sweeter thing that you get out of life with your bravery, with your resilience, is knowing that all those things that are in your way can't stop you. That's like what makes you the most fiercest, badass, strongest freaking thing on the face of the earth.
So you really got to show the range of a character. And I think the true power in that is showing a person's true range of like, I can be fragile and I can be fierce. And that's what it's all about.
How could you do that work? How could you will yourself, even if you weren't in your right state of mind, to accomplish those things? It's fascinating to me. So when I think about that, I think about maybe a young version of myself. I think about my mom. I think about, my sister. I think about family.
I feel like fierceness and fragility are codependent characters that everyone has and that everyone needs to understand.
Life has moments of fierceness and strength and fire and vigor and all that stuff. And it should have moments of sadness, of weakness, of despair, of crying probably. And to truly live, I think you have to feel all those things. I think that's what makes you feel as a person.
I think that there is fierceness in being fragile.
To me, I think being one always requires some amount of the other.
We can't be fierce without being a little fragile.
There is a resilience in vulnerability. There is a bravery in feeling weak.
Fierceness and fragility work like yin and yang. They're codependent elements that can't live without one another. If you try to imagine yourself a life of full fierceness and nothing else, you're going to be an asshole, and I'm not going to like you. And if you live a life in fragility, you're just going to live a life of like what could have been, So knowing how to utilize those superpowers are very important to everyone, and I feel like we all need to know how to use them in our everyday lives.
Everything in the world is balance. So you can't have one without the other. You can't be brave and you've never been vulnerable. You can't have courage without fear. You know, you can't have strength without weakness. Like, everything works in conjunction with each other. Everything works in balance with each other, in harmony with each other. And yeah, I think it's bringing things together that seem like they're opposites, that don't work, but they make beautiful things happen for us.
I think it's both. I think everything is both. I think you can find fierceness and gentleness in everything. And I think that that is a good thing.